All right, this is episode 26, I think, of PODLOMATIC, which is still ill-defined interview show where I try to interview fellow creators in the comics industry and interesting creators in general. Today, I have Cody from, well, he's doing multiple projects, but why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Cody Fernandez with Ironverse Comics. We're trying to build the best and probably only weird Western universe in comics. We've got a heck of a ride in store for you folks. Some of you will be familiar with last year's crowdfunding campaign for Jack Iron's Steel Cowboy. I had already had the line art done for issue number one, and so we kind of ran off of that, and now we're about to release issue number two and running another campaign for our second out of five titles, Cactus Coyote. And I'm just excited to be here. Thanks for having me, George.
Oh, it's my pleasure to talk to you. How did you guys, or what was the genesis of your project? How did it become so big? Was it always so ambitious?
Well, when I was Ironverse Comics, in particular Jack Irons, he came out of the transition from childhood to adulthood. I wrote it in my teens, late teens, and trying to grapple all those youthful dreams and ideas and perspectives on the world and not letting them fall behind, but also adapting, what it means to be an adult and learning more and more of what existence really is. And that spurred me to write quite a bit for Jack. And I sat on that for a while. But the overall genesis was once I had Jack, I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do, which was kind of a Western heavy metal Justice League, in a way, or Avengers, a superhero team. And I always have kept that for about the last decade in mind, and I've just been grinding at it. And last year, I got a kick in the ass in life that I had to find something to fill a good void, or not want to keep going. So I
Mm-hmm.
leaned into my comics. I had been promoting Jack number one, kind of pitching it to different indie publishers for about 4 years at that point, and no traction. So I decided to go straight to the consumer, and I chose a good time.
Yeah, there seems to be a sort of renaissance where social media and the audience hunger for content, but also a rising disappointment in the main publishers has sort of created this interesting Bermuda Triangle for indie creators. How did you recognize that something was going on, and when did you, or how did you jump in? Did you just know people and introduce yourself?
So I didn't recognize anything. It was a lot of luck. Ironverse Comics has been exceedingly lucky on so many fronts. Um, what happened is, at the beginning of that year, about January or so, I had tried to do the same campaign. I was successful with the second time. I ran that. I got $10. The second campaign, it came at the heels of Jawbreakers, and before Cyberfrog, and I kind of was able to get attention on that because everybody was looking at the new indie scene. And when that was happening, I was just myself, and I was a shameless whore of a shiller for my work, because I truly believed in it. And again, I didn't have much else going on that was keep me grounded, keep me going. So I really leaned heavy into it, and I just happened to connect with a lot of wonderful people, and I've been doing that for about this year and a half now, and all of it kind of just came together. I lucked out. I would say Jack Irons' campaign was one of the most unorthodox in indie comics. How many adaptations and looseness to it, but we've been able to deliver, and I've been very proud to see those books reach people's hands.
You mentioned, I guess, your role in these projects is the sort of writer, brainstormer, and in some sense, marketing as well. I've seen a lot of writers take on that role while the artists are working on the books. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate enough. I have a list kind of pinned to our Twitter kind of roles. I'm kind of a co-editor. I didn't start that way. I was the only person kind of working that at the beginning, but a somebody who was really grounded into being an author. He has written for a little while and for quite a bit. He took interest in the project. We became good friends, and eventually he pitched an idea to me in a few different phases, and that manifested into basically Ironverse Comics has two sections. One is in space, and one is on Earth. And he has kind of carved out what space is going to feel like for Ironverse Comics. And with our latest crowdfunder, you folks can find out yourself. It's Cactus Coyote, and we've been working on that about since Jack's campaign closed. We put out a 40-page free to read manga, just to kind of give people an idea, kind of what we did with Jack. Jack, during the campaign, you were able to go and look at the full 24-page issue #1 in black and white. And we kind of feel that if you're unknown, that's one way, people can go see for themselves if they like it, if they were interested. And then your unknown status doesn't matter if you put a quality product in front of them.
Yeah, that's one of the big. Lots of people disagree, I suppose,
Yeah.
or debate it. Like, what's the best way to present your stuff to new audiences while at the same time not, I guess, shooting yourself in the foot with. Like, for instance, I talked to the Rags guys, and they did not like the piracy aspect of what some people were doing, and understandably. So they offered their book for a relatively low price online, like $1, $1.50, like that. You could buy it digitally. For myself, I'm actually going to be offering a PDF, I think, of my first and second issue, and just kind of see how the behavior is. But so you guys are offering it for black and white, basically.
Well, on Tapas, we published it as a web comic. At least I
Oh,
did first because I couldn't get it to. So that was my second step after pitching to indie publishers for about 4 years. I threw that up there because I thought that was the best way to again attract for that first campaign that didn't do so well. But it ended up being quite a boon on the second campaign because I was able to point folks who were interested in looking at the art. Well, you can read it here, and then if you want to see it in color and you want to see issue #2, go look at our campaign. Um, and that seemed to work very well. And with Cactus Coyote, the manga is not completely different, but it is a manga. It reads right to left. It's by Dollar Coins, the writer creator Cactus Coyote, and myself. I did the pretty shoddy letters. I'm not much of a letterer, but it works. It works. It looks like a fan translation of a manga, in my opinion. So I think that kind of has a good feel to it. And so that's we're trying to do a kind of a separation between the free and what you're working for, what you're buying into with our crowdfunding, and so far that's been doing pretty well.
mhm.
We're at about 7,000 views on Jack since last year, and we're about at 1,000 now at Coyote. So I mean, it's getting seen is the other bit. It's getting in people's minds, and if we can continue to get folks to want to back for physical and all the other fun stuff we're doing, I think we got a winning formula.
Mhm. Are you going to try to get your stuff into stores, or is it just online only for now?
So, fun story about that. So during one of the adaptations, during Jack #1 and two's campaign, it was really just for #2. I just wanted to fund the line art for issue #2. I didn't want to fund anything else. That's what the campaign was about. But as it got attention, a startup publisher found us called Wicked Publishing. They took a great interest in Jack, and they were willing to take on the burden of fulfillment and the publishing costs, all of them from the ISBN numbers to to the printing, all of that good stuff. What a publisher does, and once that happened, I was able to pseudo add to a tier, the $25 tier, and any of the tiers above, you'd get physical issues, and that really blew up the campaign. And a lot more people took interest. Having digital only does seem to shoot yourself in the foot. People want to hold those books. That's kind of part of why they're funding the comics. Digital still hasn't hit a point where people are going to that first, which is great. I prefer physical books myself, but So that was one adaptation I was very proud to make. And so Wicked Publishing is trying to get them into stores. Myself too. I think we're going to have to go the Jeff Smith Bone route though, and just pitch them straight to the stores, because distributors are really closing and clamping their markets down as best they can and controlling the flow. So you got to go around it, and that's part of what this crowdfunding is. You got to make your own way to get your art to people these days.
Yeah, I've been asking my local shops, and they all kind of tell the same story. They all are bitter about Diamond, but they don't know how to get around it. I guess there has been talk for a while about like alternate distribution, where somebody like an agent, let's say, might be able to take a whole bunch of books by different creators and say, oh, here's a good one, here's a good one, and maybe we can all ship our books to that one person and then have them contact every LCS in the country. But for now, yeah, it looks like it's all of us are going to have to do this, like you said, Jeff Smith style, and just call every LCS in the country and see if they want our books.
Send preview issues, whatever you can. I mean, you gotta hustle. It's a hustle. It's a fight. It's a scrape. You're climbing up this hill that's completely vertical.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
there's no angle to it, and
Yeah.
you can't. If you give up or falter for a second, you're gonna fall a few feet if you can catch yourself at all.
Yeah.
And that's part of the fun. One of the reasons I like Cactus Coyote's campaign is because we are really pushing that gambling aspect. If people are familiar with the manga and anime Bakuman, one of the famous sayings is it's always a gamble. You're always putting mangaka comic creators are gamblers. It's just plain and simple. So you got to do your best to hedge your bets, and that does always mean your success is riding on yourself.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, I mean, if you ask any investor, and if they are the gambling type of person, the best kind of gambles are the ones where you can try to control the outcome. And a lot of our successes depend on what you might call the hustle, or you mentioned the word shilling for ourselves.
Yep.
You know, that's pretty apt, I would say. Really, like for instance, I used to be very shy about showing my stuff to people, and the same thing with dating and that sort of thing. I've
Yeah.
always been a very shy person, but once you do it enough times and you kind of let yourself feel the rejection, there's a sort of, for me at least, something happened where I'm just like, I guess if you get punched enough times in like boxing, you stop feeling it. Maybe something like that. I'm really sorry, my phone's going off. I'm gonna
Oh,
put
it's
that
fine.
silent.
I just thought you were leveling up or getting some coins. All good.
Maybe we are leveling up as we talk. But yeah, it sort of feels that like when I used to be initially scared of rejection, when you get rejected enough times and you study why you get rejected and you realize, 90% of the people you talk to are just not going to be interested, but that's okay. And then you start improving yourself, and I'm talking about comics, not good looks or anything like that. But if you try to improve your art and your stories, maybe you'll get less and less rejections. And then the more you do something, the better you get at it. Have you guys felt a sort of, was there an initial sort of rejection phase that you mentioned talking to other publishers, but now that you've gone straight to the consumer, what have been the lessons you've learned? What's the difference between failure back then and the success now?
Well, one was dedication. Again, I literally pivoted my life focus to it, and I was again lucky enough to be able to do so at that time, even with what was happening. But and not everybody can do that. But I was literally doing about 20-hour days promoting Jack for, it'd be about four or five days a week. And so to get that traction, and I've gone from last year. I created my Twitter account last year, and so I've gotten about 3,000 followers
Mhm.
off of community engagement. But that's probably my favorite part about it. You were talking about rejection. I find every rejection a chance for positive interaction. There's always a way to either learn from it, of course, or just to spur yourself even better to try the next time.
Mhm.
Jack and Ironverse Comics has been exceedingly lucky, um, in again in a lot of ways. One of those is that most people either don't engage with it because it's not their thing, or they really engage with it because it is their thing. It's very rare I got anybody saying, "Oh, this sucks," or "I don't like this." I think that's because our art is just so solid and beautiful. Um, Another adaptation during the campaign, again, it started just wanting to get the black and white line art for issue 2 done. Um, a colorist found us. I wasn't looking for a colorist. I wasn't expecting to have a colorist for the campaign, but he found us. Matthias Laborde. He had to step away from coloring because it just wasn't getting him enough money, which was just awful, poor guy. But he found us and decided he wanted to color a page because he loved the art so much, particularly page 3 of issue 1, where it's Jack riding on his motorcycle, drawn by robot horses. He really wanted to color that, and once I saw that page, I talked to him. It was absolutely gorgeous, did wonderful work. He's like, "Yeah, I could do that if you guys can do this," and he gave me his budget, and then we added it as stretch goals to the campaign, and again, his colors helped spur it too like crazy. And in between the time from issue 1 and getting issue 2 done, he had to step away, and so we picked up Stephen Cannon. It was a long fight finding a replacement colorist. My artist, Maxi Dallo, he really put his foot down. I kept wanting to just get the book out. I didn't want to take as long as we have. But I think him putting his artistic foot down, saying, "No, I want my lines to look good. I want them to be improved by this color, not muted." And I don't have the greatest artistic eye. I'll admit that. I'm easily pleased, but he wasn't. And so we dug for a while and found Steve. Tried Steve, and he just did amazing work. And he's continued to for us. He actually has done 8 more pages than Matthias has done. Our second issue is 32 pages in length. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just again, a lot of adaptations with our campaign. For instance, too, since I launched it digitally only, one of our biggest pitfalls was Indiegogo did not collect shipping addresses for us. So I've actually manually had to ask every backer who backed physically for their shipping address. And so that'll probably continue to cause problems for the length of the book. But we printed enough for replacements, and everybody who contacts us eventually with the backer number will be getting the book. They're just sitting there waiting for you. I don't think we're actually missing too many people, which is great. Makes it a lot easier on us. But and most people who back at that much money for a comic book want their comic book, so that's been good. I will take a second to thank our patient backers. They really have been crazy patient, especially the folks overseas. We shipped our domestic issue number 1, I believe, in January of this year. But international has still been waiting for anything but the digital number 1. We got those out at the same time if they wanted them. Most people didn't who backed physically don't even care about the digital extras and stuff, but you still want to provide it for those who do. And yeah, we did go DRM free with our digital. I'm not such a big anti-piracy activist as Rags is, but I agree. There's a lot there, and if you're getting strangled while you're working, your funds are getting strangled, you're not going to keep working, and piracy can influence that somewhat. But again, I just wanted to provide the best product we could to people, and then after it's out to them, it's theirs. So I don't mind too much so far. When I've been not called out on it, but spoken to about that. I've always said my idea can change as I learn and go through this. Only been at it a year and a half, so lots to learn.
Yeah, you mentioned scanlations and that sort of thing. I know that when I was younger, that was my only access to a lot of my favorite manga. Yeah. And unfortunately, like that, I've spoken to publishers in person, including the people who Shonen Jump and all those people, and they've told me that piracy in America was killing their business, but the reason for that was that they were releasing their stories on a staggered schedule compared to Japan. And all the people who loved their series, like Death Note, Naruto, the only way that we could stay kept up with their series was to read the scanlations. So that was up to the publisher to stay up to date to the tastes of their audiences, especially in the States. But because I committed that crime, let's say, of reading scanlations, and I feel bad about that, but like, I just couldn't get up-to-date comics on my favorite series. I probably have the same position as you do that you mentioned with Cactus Coyote and talking about the manga format and all that stuff is partially for people in our position. Releasing, like, say, a PDF or releasing the series online is almost a form of advertising. And if people send a copy of their PDF to their friend, I would consider it similar to like letting my friend borrow my favorite comic or something, and then they give it back or they have a copy of it. I don't like the idea that, for instance, somebody might, for instance, they could profit off the PDF or something like
Yeah,
that. That's
that I've
impossible.
seen rags actually deal with that directly, and that would piss me off too. Is that
Yeah,
I'm selling this thing for cheaper than they're selling it, and yet you're buying it from them, and they didn't give me anything. That would piss me off too. And so
yeah.
that's kind of the line for me. But I haven't seen that with Jack. I haven't even seen any issue number ones on eBay, which is great. Which means everybody who got their issue number one actually enjoy and want to keep it, which is what I prefer.
Yeah.
But we are building our print runs and our how we're going about the physical books with investors in mind, just because we saw what happened with Rags, who completely tried to go around that and didn't quite understand the speculator market on comic books and really got hit hard by it.
Yeah.
So, and which is great because some of their books go for about $600 now, which is just wonderful. I love seeing indie creators get that kind of value to their work. That's just outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
But so I can see the ups and downs. And again, I'm just going to try and adapt as I continue and as Team Ironverse Comics continues putting out work.
Yeah, it's. I guess we're all just talking to each other, and we learn from each other's experiments and see what works. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all just theoretical right now. It's so new in some ways, and the important thing is that creators are able to afford to, especially, let's say, artists and those types of people. It takes so much time to put together a new book, a 30-page book, at a page a day. That could cost thousands of dollars for one creator.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
and a message to all the listeners and consumers, myself included, is if you want to keep reading your favorite series, try your best to support them. If not financially, just tell your friends and maybe they'll support financially. But that's the real trick. Like, if we put out, you and I put out our series, a couple of episodes a year, we could probably work even faster. But it's just a question of being able to afford to sit at the desk and make these books.
Yeah, in my case, it's to be able to afford the time of these wonderful talents. For instance, Maxi, he's our line artist. He's been giving me very lucked out. So he's from Argentina, and I was able to. It's kind of a fun story I like recounting is how I met him. I had been trying to. I ended up with some money due to a kind of a sad thing, and anywho, I had finally again wanted to work on this comic. I had 10 scripts just sitting in my folder for a good 2 or 3 years before this, and I was trying. I had never dove into comic work at all. So in terms of, I didn't know if I did the scripts right, which I found out there is not really a strict script format for comics. Everybody who especially indie creators that I've worked with, has a different script format, which I think is wonderful. I like that. The pander between the artist and the writers is what's most important. As long as the communication's happening, it doesn't matter how.
Mm-hmm.
But anywho, I had tried a couple people. They had kind of dicked me around, didn't give me prices, didn't give me anything, made me wait weeks. And eventually I was like, okay, well, fine. This method of trying to find people is going to work. Let's try Craigslist. And so I tried Craigslist, and Maxie contacted me. He happened to be in New Mexico, in Taos, my hometown, at that point, which was crazy. I was able to meet him at a local McDonald's, see his portfolio, pitch the scripts, talk with him, shake his hand. We worked out a deal, and yeah, we've been working at it ever since. And now it's been about 5 years now we've been working together. And anywho, it's a trip. Really, I try to tell folks you can make it happen. Just be, again, as I keep using the word, adaptable. You have to be able to change to your environment and work with the good hands you're played, and fold the bad hands you don't have, or you do have. Excuse me. But yeah. It's a heck of a journey, and I've been really glad to be able to take part as deeply as I have been, and to assemble 5 teams, but loosely, 3 of those teams just have the line artist and the writer, which is myself, attached. The others are kind of in progress loosely, but I have the line artists attached, which is great.
As a writer, well, there's a famous quote that I really love from George Martin of Game of Thrones. If someone doesn't know, he says that there are two different types of writers, architects and gardeners. And he compared them to sort of their style of, an architect might plan out every line of dialogue and every beat in the story, whereas gardeners just kind of create this playground for their characters and let them go nuts. Do you identify with one or the other?
I would be a gardener. I would be very, very, very true. What I do for my scripts. So I write down I wouldn't call it too loose. It's basically it is what I saw in my head, dialogue and all of that, but it just goes to Maxi, and then Maxi does the art. He can add a panel, change a panel, add, whatever kind of mood he wants to. If he wants to add something to it, that's all his. He's never delivered something that I was like, oh, that's worse than my idea. It's always been better, always. Just visually appealing, all of that. So I've lucked out that way. And then once he finishes the line art, I'll do a rough lettering to the line art that goes to our letterer, after colors and such to letter the book. And so the scripts significantly change between what I hand him and what actually ends up on the page. Just because I try to emphasize whatever he's done in the panels, and so that's been our pander, how we've been able to get these books together. And I think with issue number 2, folks will see that in the 4 years since issue number 1, Maxi's style has changed. He's gotten a little bit tighter, a lot less excess in his lines, so he can produce faster, but it's also more stylistic. And I think my writing significantly improved. I really like what we did together on that. I'm just hoping I didn't ruin his art.
Ruin in which sense?
Oh, I don't know. Too busy. Too busy. I really fought. A lot of this issue could have been without dialogue. It was so communicative, straight from his art.
Yeah, it takes a lot of restraint and practice as a writer, especially to let the story be told visually, and that's one of the key differences I think between American and manga comics. In manga, it's told sort of like cinematically. Whereas, for instance, there's a famous scene where somebody might say Superman jumps out the window, and there will be a little narration box saying, as Superman jumped out the window, and there's a dialogue box saying, I'm jumping out the window. That would be the American style of doing it. Whereas in manga, it would just be one panel or several panels as he jumps out the window. And I guess because of the way that the production, what's the word I'm looking for? The conveyor belt. What's
well, the production schedule, but yeah, I get what you're saying. The mangaka in the trenches compared to the Western in the trenches.
Yeah, when you separate all the jobs, you got the writer who's very much sort of the driving force behind the entire project, who hands it off to his penciler. Whereas in manga, the penciler and the writer are usually the same person, except in cases like Bakuman, where you mentioned like Death Note and that sort of thing.
Yeah, Bakuman, he still did the layouts. He did the names and storyboards still.
The writer?
Which is kind of an interesting way to do it. That's actually how Dollar Coins is working with his artist, Andrea Boscolo on Cactus Coyote. He's still doing names for him. And then Andrea just goes to town with his art style and adding kind of what he wants to do. Dollar Coins is much more particular on what's in his art in the on the pages than I am, which has been interesting to watch and kind of be part of. I think again, it's every project's going to have a unique pander that you have to flow into a groove with. I know artists always heard it again and again. They respect the less tight pull you have on their reins. Some artists need it to produce. I found that out myself working with 6 teams on pinups for Jack number 2. That ended up in the printed issue, and we have a couple other very cool plans for them. Some of them you really need to be on them to get work produced and to get it done right. But most will provide something beyond your imagination as long as you allow those reins to kind of allow them to take them where they want.
Yeah, I suppose every team has a sort of, or every single person that you work with on a team, there's a different dynamic between each individual. And sometimes, let's say you're working with a team of 3 people, you'll act differently when you're with the whole group versus when you're with individuals. And the more people you add to a team, the more complex it becomes, because we almost sort of have to put different hats on with different people. Like I know a lot of artists who are very sensitive, and you have to be careful when you give them feedback and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. But at the end of the day, what you need to have is a finished product that everyone's proud of.
Yes.
So it's interesting to see, especially from your position, because I'm sure every creative person you have talked to has a different. You have to speak a different language with them almost.
Almost. I'm again. I keep saying lucky. I've got so far I've been able to gel with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
From marketing end, never really had a problem with anybody. Even the people who wanted to have a problem with me, I was able to flip them around that day. It's I really do enjoy that part. It's one of my being back on the Cactus Coyote campaign trail. Really, it makes me smile. I love that part of the interaction, seeing people's faces. Well, not seeing people's faces, but getting the reactions, playing around with it, trying to make it fun for folks. Um, that's what keeps me here. I love that social aspect, and I'm not a person who likes people, so it's been a trip to balance that. Find that I enjoy interacting with most folks in this way about our work, but not so much about everything else. And I've done my best to balance that in this pretty hostile creative environment. It's hostile, but it's very free. So you have to really understand that balance and work within it. The freedom is so very worth everything else, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. I've noticed, I guess, maybe hostile instead of hostile. I would say competitive. There's a lot of creators all fighting for a kind of a relatively small pie right now, but there are different ways that I've noticed, especially lately. We don't have to go into it, but
Yeah.
there are different ways to engage the audience
Yes.
or the people, or the consumers, I suppose you could say. And I think the winds are blowing in the direction of project focused, positive interactions, as opposed to, say, drama and that sort of thing. And that kind of ties into something that I'm curious about now that you and I are talking. I could have
Yeah.
sworn you would have identified as a very extroverted person. Do you have training or anything like that with interacting with people? Because you're obviously very excited about your project, and
That's the training I needed. That's all the training I needed. Really, I have a strong belief. I've been working at this for so long, and it meant so much to me at that time. And I have so much faith in how cool what we're working on is. There's no fear there. If people don't like it, it's not for them. But I know I do. I know my teams do. I know I've gotten an incredible. I must have 175 pieces of fan art in over this last year.
mm,
There's just that alone, it gives me faith to dive head in when I'm not so much one who would want to. In fact, I'm a huge privacy advocate. Going on to social media was not something I wanted to do
mhm.
at all, ever. But I knew it was the only way to get this thing done. So I took that plunge, took that sacrifice, and here I am, able to talk with wonderful creators like yourself, meet and work with some of the coolest unknown, well, not unknown, but lesser known artists in indie, and just have a lot of freaking fun trying to build something just wild. A lot of the reviews of Jack, it's a huge mix of themes. It's something that you wouldn't usually get um, just out of mainstream. It's just it's too complicated. But how we're going about it, I think that doesn't. Through the reviews I've seen, it doesn't seem to actually affect it, because basically I'm just building a universe, and that universe feels complicated, but the story is very simple. And we've got a lot of different angles for these stories. And again, I have such a strong faith in our teams, and such a desire to build the Ironverse that really the introvert in me, the quiet guy, kind of had to learn to shut up and allow the uh, allow the flow to just take over.
Yeah, I've seen the process or part of the business, I guess, of making comics. It's two sides of a coin. One is the product itself, and the other side is the marketing and all that stuff. So Well, obviously, we have been talking about marketing, but I do want to ask about the content now. You're talking about the Ironverse and specifically Jack Irons and Cactus Coyote. Could you give us a sort of rundown of what these books are about and what you hope to do with this universe, I guess?
Oh, absolutely. So, Jack Irons, most people's gonna be most people's introduction. I wanted to mix science fiction. I wanted to mix Mad Max style post-apocalypse, but in the Ironverse, it really is a ongoing galactic apocalypse. It's not afterwards; it's during. Um, and and sci-fi and old surgically, Man with No Name westerns. Just again, it came out of me going from childhood to adulthood and what I would take with me from there. And in childhood, those were some of my. They were the kind of things that blew my mind. It was my younger self seeing these more adult kind of action films and these themes. And Jack overall is a well. I'm gonna pitch Jack as a character, and then I think you'll get where I'm going. Jack Irons, he's a immortal cowboy. He was born in about 1800. He later on he comes to terms with the fact that he can remember about 2,000 years worth of past lives, and that he can't die. The concept was basically, as an adult, you come to terms with what it is to be human and all the weight and all the atrocities and all the horror that comes with being one of us. And you lose some of that childhood wonder. And Jack's grip is, well, I can't end that. I have to live with it. I can't kill myself. I can't do anything about it. So how am I gonna be able to, I remember doing horrible things. I remember being part of that. I remember seeing it, doing it, feeling it, and he can't get away from it. So that's kind of the concept of Jack. He's trying to come with terms, how he can wake up in the morning and just keep doing his day. And that's what the main theme we'll explore throughout Jack Irons is. That it's going to go a little bit, it will change as the arcs continue to go on. The four main pillars of Ironverse comics are what people recognize them as the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, but they're more complex than that in Ironverse comics. Jack's tale takes place on Earth, so he has the Earth's manifestation of the Horsemen, whereas the galaxy, each planet, has the potential and the extreme likelihood of manifesting one or more of the Horsemen. And so there's a lot of different flavors, a lot of different beings of these four atrocities, these four, I've used the term cancers, I've used horrors. It's almost like the seven deadly sins in Shazam. It's these things that you're trying to avoid and rise above. And that's kind of the theme, and we're just attacking it directly. We have a manifestation of corporate greed and apathy and toil, and that's what he wants the entire universe to be, Famine Inc. We have a manifestation of hatred, violence, and conflict in war. We have a manifestation of reckless science and medicine in plague, and we have a manifestation of the cessation of all life, of an actual silent peace and death. And so we're working those four themes throughout the entire Ironverse. That's really they're the pillars. Each of our heroes are opposing one or more of those ideals, those thought forms, those manifestations. And they don't have to be on Earth. In fact, there's a lot more there too. There's a fifth bit. There's a lot I want to introduce, and we're trying to do it very slowly. And that is hard for me because of how much I love all these ideas and how much I want to see them manifest. But you got to slowly introduce this very heady brew, and I'm proud to do so. Cactus Coyote, he was a little shapeshifter. It's one of the most innocent beings in the Ironverse. They know no evil. They can do no evil. Their society is very adorable. It's the exact opposite of what you'd expect in our universe. And he was taken by plague and turned into a garbage disposal. He put a pocket dimension in there, and he just shoved bio waste and anything into him. And eventually, he finds a way out and escapes. And he's trying to reclaim his identity and trying to forge himself into something new. And that's Cactus Coyote's kind of themes: is finding your way and your person within the circumstances you're given. And I think that's kind of an overall of the Ironverse. Most of these characters have that kind of going for them. They're a unique being in a universe of awful trying to find their place in it.
Mm-hmm. Is there a finite story for all of these characters, or is it just something that you plan to keep doing for as long as you can?
Well, that second part is what we'd like. Me specifically, uh, point with Immortal is that there are, and Past Lives, having both of those, there's an infinite number of stories. Jack in particular, I hope to one day reach a point where I can start handing him off to whatever creator, because there's an infinite amount of tales in his past you can tell as well. And whoever wants to can take that mantle and be able to still be part of the Ironverse mythos and part of Jack while not affecting what he is in the future. So that's one of the things with Jack in particular. But we do have a set finish to Jack's story in the overall Ironverse comics. It could happen second arc of Jack, or it could happen 15, 20 years from now. My hope would be 15, 20 years from now. We got a lot of tales to tell, and I want to see them all happen. But we do have an end if we need to pull the plug for whatever reason. But at the end of the day, my hope would be this is what I want to do. This is again, it's what the passion is, what fuels me. It means a lot.
Now, growing up, I'm sure a lot of writers have this sort of inspiration going all the way back to when they were kids. But you mentioned your love for westerns and Mad Max and all that sort of thing. What do you think were some of the patterns that, like, what do you think you latched onto as a kid that maybe now as an adult looking back, you realize, oh, these were the themes that really spoke to me?
That's the thing. I'm still trying to define certain emotions that come to me when I watch things. You know, the powerful ones that sometimes you don't quite understand why it's setting you off in that way. I don't know if I've been able to introduce that into Jack, but the biggest one, which I kind of was speaking about, is that that trying to find a footing in this universe, something to pivot from, to be able to take a place of strength and continue to move forward. That's probably one of the biggest things. I'm a huge revenge fantasy fan. Huge Punisher was the first comic that really hooked me into reading everything and collecting as much as I could. But the thing that got me hooked into comics and why I'm a writer is Garth Ennis and Clayton Crane's two arcs on Ghost Rider, Road to Damnation, and then Trail of Tears. Um, and so that dark humor really mattered a lot to me. It was a type of comic, a type of content that I had not seen anywhere else via TV or movies or anything. So that's something I try to integrate a little bit in, but I'm still working on that. And really, I'm not trying to be funny with these. I'm just trying to give you enough of a breather that the depression doesn't smother the reader.
Mhm.
But it's there's a lot. One of the main other inspirations for Jack Irons is Samurai Jack. In fact, the Jack name is an homage to that. I wanted to do that. You know how all westerns are based off of a samurai, right? So I had to kind of put that in there a little bit too, and part of that is all of Samurai Jack's trainings from different cultures, working together to fight this evil. And that's another thing with Jack, is that he is a man of many cultures. He knows a lot. He's burdened with knowledge of all kinds, and so that's one of the themes I like too, is that the world's culture belongs to each human who wants to reach for it. That one's gonna that hammer Damocles may come down some point, but that is one of the footings of Jack in particular,
Mhm.
that I hope to open up, because the wonder, if something you find is magic and something you love, I don't care what kind of person you are, it's just matters to you. That's important. It's here on this earth, and you're engaging with it.
Hmm.
You have the right to. So so that's part of it. There, there's a lot we're going to work through as we keep going.
You mentioned samurai flicks and then their relationship to cowboy flicks, and I was thinking about this actually last week. I was rewatching Yojimbo,
Okay.
Akira Kurosawa, if anybody's curious,
Yeah.
which was remade into I think A Fistful of Dollars, or not
Yes.
even remade; it was copied almost.
Yeah, it was basically copy and paste, and then that was copy and paste to Last Stand with Bruce Willis, which they put it into the 1910s. It basically, the story is timeless.
Yeah.
Those kind of revenge stories are just absolutely timeless. It's a man fighting for something right, and then kind of leaving, ghosting,
Hmm.
ghosts in, ghosts out. The Western is built on the concept of the dead man's walk. He has some kind of mission that's most likely going to get him killed, but he's going to get it done. And Jack is on a immortal dead man's walk, and I found that concept very intriguing to myself too.
I like that theme of sort of, I guess, a personal sense of justice. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to walk into this town, clean it up, and then move on. I guess a lot of westerns have that sort of the mysterious stranger, the laconic hero who he's mysterious, but that also lets the audience project their own motivations onto him. He's sort of a blank slate, maybe by design, to allow the readers to say, oh, the reason he wants, for instance, in Good, Bad, and the Ugly, which I say is the best Western of all time,
Oh, so good.
Clint Eastwood, he wants that bucket of money, and who
Yep.
knows what he's going to do with it. But it doesn't matter. The whole point is, I mean, people are all fighting for this money, but it's really the relationships of all these characters that makes it interesting. And just
Exactly. The justification doesn't matter as much as the journey, and it never will. That's what when people are always trying to find some grand point for their work. I always say, you can have that grand point. That's fine, but if you're trying to focus around it, you're going to lose yourself on that journey. It's not going to be focused, and it's not going to have a very a tight path for people to follow along with, and that's what you kind of want to have. You want this feeling of walking alongside the characters, seeing what they're seeing, doing what they're doing, and if you go too far into a point, you're going to be working towards it the entire time instead of just trying to tell something.
yeah, your. I'm curious to hear about your, I guess your. How do I put this? As a young man, right? We
Yeah.
had different comic stores to go to, and I grew up in the 90s. So I had Image Comics. Marvel was kind of for me. DC, I tried to read comics from the big two, and I was never really interested. I liked some of Dark Horse's stuff, but mostly when they imported manga. Um, what's your like? How did you become interested in comics as a kid, and have you been following the comics industry now as an adult?
Well, so as a kid, about the time just before I found Jack, so I haven't. I live in a small town, New Mexico. There's never been a comic shop here ever. The nearest one is 65 miles away.
Wow.
It's Santa Fe. So I haven't. I didn't grow up alongside comics. I had a good friend, my best friend, almost brother, for my entire life. He was a comic guy, so he kind of introduced me to that. And the thing that really hooked me was the imagery of Frank Castle, the big black, a serial killer who's considered a superhero. I was intrigued by that. People are looking forward for this guy to murder and mow down people, and I wanted to see how that was. When you're a kid, you don't really understand that. Like, one of my big naive ideas, I remember very well from a kid, is wanting to be friends with everybody. So that conceptually was very very foreign to me.
Mhm.
And then the action films also kind of introduce that dark line that sometimes needs to be drawn in life, and so that really intrigued me. And then I found Ghost Rider, and his imagery just blew me away. Everything I loved about Frank, and then taken up. I grew up with a biker dad, so I was already kind of engrossed in biker culture, and seeing this flaming skeleton on a motorcycle, just especially Clayton Crane's work with Garth Ennis, that's what got me. That got me hooked on comics for life. Um, Besides that, I really didn't read much besides Punisher and Ghost Rider for quite some time. I would order when I had extra money because that's the only way I could do it. But that I didn't have internet till I was 17, something like that. So I mainly borrowed things
Yeah.
to read and stuff like that. But since then, I've definitely blown up my collection.
Mhm.
But in terms of following, I'm a back issue guy. I don't really. I've never been a current issue guy. The closest thing I followed, again, kind of how you did your mangas. I followed I followed the Civil War, Marvel Civil War event, the first one, and that was the first big scale thing I had ever really read. And I read every issue I could find my way to, and it was a hell of a thing. Frank's role in that too really got me hooked, and that's kind of. And then I read Secret Invasion and Siege and kind of the stuff after that, and then it started getting beat up a little bit. My favorite issue of Punisher in terms of art and story is the first issue of Punisher Dark Reign. Where he tries to assassinate Norman Osborn with a scroll sniper rifle from 2 miles away, and the Sentry catches the bullet and then goes to chase him. So you get to see Frank against Superman. Hell of a thing, and he actually gets away. Love it. That kind of dynamic. I could expect Batman, for instance, to get away from Superman, but someone like Frank, who really is just a GI, just the best killer on the planet. He's able to do the same thing. He just bluffs the Sentry out about blowing up a hospital because they believe he'd do it. Frank wouldn't do it, but yeah, it's there's a lot. The current bit of the industry, of course. When I started crowdfunding, I wasn't actually part of this counterculture, this counter movement to the counterculture that's kind of being injected, and it's been hard just because people are a lot crueler and meaner than they need to be, no matter where they're from, what side they're pushing for. There's not enough gentle and kindness out there anymore, not enough even politeness or tolerance.
Sure.
That's kind of pushed me away from almost everything but back issues that I love and stories I want to catch up on and things I'm being told I need to read, and indie creators. Those are the folks I really get from. Rags again is a real big one. I'm always keeping up on. Big Sporkman fan. There's a lot of work out there. I've been blessed to actually meet the creators and talk with them and engage with them. And just like you here, I'm very pleased to meet you. I love your work. I find the you put a childlike kind of whimsy into it that I adore. I love every the panels you've previewed so far. Oh man, I'm so excited to get my hands on Mary Sue.
Oh shucks, I don't know. I always get embarrassed when people talk about my stuff, but thank you. That all right. So that does actually touch on something that I like to try to talk about or ask about is where do you think the future is, even in the short term? A lot of us are trying to sell our stuff online. Is it just going to be more of the same, just with bigger numbers? Hopefully, what do you think is gonna, or what do you hope is going to happen with this in the next few years?
So my hope is, I think it's going to be this kind of artisanal comic kind of idea. You've seen a lot of industries kind of go that way and be able to survive. Beer, wine. I know those are food, but the idea, the concept's very similar. You're providing a limited product, something special people can't get anywhere else, directly to a consumer or to a middleman like a shop, and not usually through a lot of other means. But my hope would be something like that, and that there would be enough room and enough people can get their foot in the door and be able to lower prices. That's the biggest one. We did that with Cactus Coyote. Your entry fee for Cactus is only $10, and that includes shipping. You'll get your physical issue. But with Jack #2, it was the 25 or up. That would get you the 2 physical issues. And so it's the prices is the biggest barrier, and the fact that it's hard to get eyes on social media simply because it's such a very loud cacophony. There's so much noise drowning out everybody. That's why I do, and I've been lucky enough that people haven't complained. A lot of other people might not do it as tactfully as me, but I do a thing called carpet bomb marketing, where I'll just hit a ton of retweets of old marketing campaigns and stuff that I've been pushing for a week or two. Do that daily, and just so that the odds of somebody's eyes getting on one of those is much higher.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're providing some kind of engagement, some kind of joke, some kind of something that's fun, then you're more likely to get that click. And even then, the click's going to be 1 out of 1,000. So you got to be shameless. If you believe in your work, there's no worries because you're putting you're putting quality out. You're not trying to sell. You're not selling snake oil. You're not putting the puff just to sell something that's not worth it. You're putting the puff because you believe in it and because it is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a line I hope a lot of other creators kind of try to uh, try to adopt. But then that would also increase the cacophony. So there's got to be a better way to get eyes on the work. And of course, comic shops is a great one. That's the one, that's the gold. Just to see your book up next to Batman or or Hellboy or something.
Mhm.
But it's hard. It's hard, especially for indie creators, because there's so many of us, and it's much easier to get a book started than it has ever been. Just like you see all the indie games, art is easier to get in than it's ever been, which also leads to a lot of shoddy products and people not putting out great stuff, but still making the noise to drown out that. And so it's a fight that's not going to go away. It's just how capitalism works, and I'm perfectly fine with that as long as you can rise up to the challenge.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a sort of oversaturation problem. Everybody,
Yeah.
I mean, there's more artists alive today than who have ever existed in history. And I always wonder, like, for instance, all the Renaissance people and the Impressionists, would we have noticed their work if they were alive today? I'm not so sure. So that can be both a good thing and a challenging thing. But I am encouraged by so many of us are trying out different tactics, and we're learning what works and what doesn't, and what the audience is, what they do like and what they don't like. And I think what the most important thing is, after we can form groups and get into fights and all that stuff, but I think the most important thing is that after all the fighting stops, the relationships that have been formed are still intact. And so years from now, when we're still talking about our comics and how we're doing, let's say 5 years from now, we're still all making our books, hopefully, we can compare notes and say, okay, so this worked, this did not work. And, we'll all hopefully be having dinner after a convention someday talking about, oh, weren't those crazy times 5 years ago? And I'm glad we all made it to we made it out of the cacophony that you mentioned.
Yeah, I'm. But my hope is very very similar hope. Um, that it doesn't just continue to the environment doesn't continue to degrade. This industry, of course, is not where it was even a decade ago, and it's I want comics to grow. Comics is a very important medium to myself. There's things you can communicate in this medium you can't communicate in cinema, and you can't communicate in novels. So it's the perfect mid ground. And just like animation is slowly been clawing its way out of that kids only kind of vibe, as the generations kind of change, and the kids who grew up with animation and loved it actually are like, you know what, I want more, and I would actually like adult animation. Just like in the 90s, Vertigo's like, yeah, that's what we're going to do. I was very sad to see Vertigo go. But anywho,
Mm.
I think there's room for that. And I think if you can carve your niche out, deliver something that nobody else can, which I believe every individual artist can do. They just need to really refine what it is they want to put out. Um, then there's space for everybody, because that niche is your space. Nobody else can take it because you're the only one who can put that out.
Mm.
And so that would be my hope. That would be what I really I want, because then yes, exactly. We get our nice we get our panels, and we can get to meet and engage, and have that dinner, have that beer, and continue building on what we're trying to do, which is making comics a bigger thing again. And it's a difficult thing. Even print is a tough one, and environmentally, cutting down trees isn't looked upon too good.
Mhm.
There's a lot of hurdles to keeping print alive in the next 20 years. And comics can be one of the best battlegrounds for it artistically. And my hope is that battleground, it continues to gain ground instead of lose ground.
Yeah, I think we're right at the beginning. It's only been a couple of years, and it's almost been an hour, so I'll end on this, I think. Um,
Right on.
I've been inspired to look back at the history of comics, all the way back from, well, it's longer than this, but I still always look back at the 70s and 80s and how they started with alternative comics with the X at the end. And they were so underground that they only existed in like one or two cities, like in the Chicago or
Yeah.
Detroit area. Um, and there were these little pockets, San Francisco and all that stuff. And in the 90s, we had Image Comics, and they broke off from Marvel. And then I think in the early 2000s, we had the manga explosion. And that only, I think the only reason the manga explosion failed is because borders closed and because of the recession. And another few years later, now we have this. Whatever this is, I think is going to be the new, it has the potential to be the new tornado of whatever, indie talent is out there who can't seem to get in touch with. I can't get in touch with any publisher that I want to talk to. They won't talk to me for whatever reason. But I know that people like my stuff, and I'm sure a lot of creators like yourself all feel the same way. We don't have to go through the publishers anymore. We can just find our audience online. And
Yeah, in my case, just real quick, I
Yeah.
do have the publisher, Wicked Publishing. I recommend you guys check them out. But it is a ground up publisher. It's more part of the team,
Mhm.
which it kind of needs to be for now, unless you can get a publisher with some decent footing and a decent track record. And the independent voices in the big is it's not there really. They're going for different voices, but not quite independent. They're still following some kind of track, some kind of plan. But even Image, I'm kind of starting to, all the titles are starting to blur together for me when I see them, and they're the biggest independent publisher out there. And like you're saying, it would be great to get under Image, somebody with those connections, but I don't know the amount of freedom you lose when you do that. And I think the freedom's what's going to make your work stand out, how you're able to make it the way you want.
Well, I mean, there's nothing really stopping us, I suppose, except,
Exactly.
yeah. I guess we are the only thing in our own way. So if we are, to put it in a cheesy way, if we know ourselves and we're able to conquer ourselves and our own limitations, it's kind of a sky's the limit entrepreneurial. It's a beautiful, I don't know. There's nothing stopping us from being successful except, how hard are we willing to work? And you really can't ask for a better opportunity than that. There's nobody here to stop us.
Yep.
But yeah, let's just, I'll quickly ask you, like, maybe plug your stuff one more time. How do we find you online? How can everybody follow you and your projects?
All right, so we've thrown out. I've tried to again. I do that carbon bomb marketing, so there's a place to find us almost everywhere on social media. The one I engage with most, the only one I kind of understand, is Twitter. You can find me personally at cowboy_steel. I do most of the updates and stuff on that page. But there's a bigger following account that we use called Ironverse Alert, at Ironverse Alert. That also is used for promotion, and it's a little bit of a role-playing account. Role play as Famine to really kind of stick it to that corporate shill angle, and sometimes even use it if I want. And then there's at Coyote Cactus. That's our newest project, running right now on Indiegogo. Please look up Cactus Coyote on Indiegogo. $10 entry fee for physical issues, $3 entry fee for the digital. We're working real hard on that one. It's been gaining some ground. I'm proud of it, and I'm proud of the work that's coming in. I'm really ecstatic with the pages. We might have a color preview for you guys here pretty soon too, which would be a hell of a thing. I can't wait to show. And we've got a merch store if you guys want to check it out. Just look up the Steel Cowboy merch store on Teespring. $1 or $2 towards us through PayPal. There's a lot of links. I just recommend if you have Twitter, go ahead and hit me up there. That's the best. But we're also on Facebook. Just look up Ironverse Comics. We're all over the place now, and I've checked Google myself, and it is like the first 4 pages. So you guys can't miss out on something you're looking for. Just looking up, just Googling us.
Mm-hmm. And I'll link to all the projects and everything in the description below, in case anyone's curious.
One more plug too is we have both free. We have the free preview manga on Tapas or Tapastic. Just look up Cactus Coyote Tapas and you'll find it. Also, Jack Irons Steel Cowboy issue #1 in black and white is still up there. And you can buy issue #1 of Jack on Comic Central, Comixology, Drive Through Comics. Basically anywhere that put out digital comics, you can find Jack.
Well, that's a lot of information to be looking up, and I'm sure everybody's going to be up to their neck with amazing content looking this all up.
That's my hope.
I'm very impressed. I have to say, Cody, you've got so much hustle, and I have a lot of lessons to learn from someone like you, and I'm sure all the listeners, anyone who wants to put out a project, is going to have to take some close notes to see how excited you are and how much you're... It's really inspirational.
I'm glad. That's my hope, and I hear that enough to make sure I keep that going while staying humble.
Yeah.
There's you got to have a little bit of confidence. You got to have those balls because people like seeing them. But you got to be able to. If you don't believe in your work, if you don't believe in your team's work, who else is gonna? So if you do, then there's no reason on capping it. Don't be shameful. Be shameless.
Mm.
Art again, it's that cacophony. Everybody else is doing it, and sadly, it's not jumping off of a cliff if the line's 1,000, 2,000 people deep. I think you'll get by just fine.
Well, that's a great example. So yeah, you guys, links in the description. Give them a follow. Take a look at all these projects and give them your support if you can. And be sure to share that stuff around because that's how indie creators like us are. We depend on shares, really. I think that's the key to marketing. So be sure to share this stuff out. So yeah, Cody, thank you for coming. Thank you for speaking with me. I hope we get to talk to you again sometime.
One more thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead, folks. Go and back Mary Sue. It's wonderful art, compelling story, a great idea, and of course, George is a great person. I'm really looking forward to seeing the work.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting project. It's already funded, so I guess the big question is going to be once everyone reads the book, do they like it enough to keep it going? So
exactly. That's why I'm waiting on for issue number 2.
That's the magic question. We'll see. So yeah, thanks for everyone for listening. I've got a lot of great interviews lined up next week, so I hope to see you again next time. Thanks.
Yep, thank you, folks.
Yeah, man. I'll hit stop here.